Hello again everyone from Tokyo, Japan, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera. I'm coming to you on a very humid and quite a bit hot day here at Hinokicho Park, and the first day that we've had with sunshine for quite some time. Normally we have the rainy season here in June, and that's pretty much the whole month of June. We expect a little bit of rain every day, and I think June was the last time I made a video. But from that time until now, it's pretty much rained every single day. It hasn't rained all day, every day, but enough that I haven't been able to come out and make a video. It's kind of quiet here at the park, which is a lucky thing. Usually later in July, the cicadas, or semi as they are called in Japan, come out. And in some places it's just too noisy outdoors for me to make a video. I heard one the other day, maybe 3 days ago, out my window. And luckily that was the only one I've heard so far. If I wait, about 2 or 3 weeks and I'm trying to make this video, there'll be like too much background noise. For those who want to know what this is like, I've made some videos last summer, in the summer before, and you can get an idea of how loud these bugs actually are. That's kind of a deafening sound. This is July. We're getting kind of close to the Olympics here in Tokyo, and yesterday they enacted yet another state of emergency, which in Tokyo doesn't really mean much. Pretty much everything is open as it always is. The only thing that the state of emergency really does is requires anyone who cares to follow the program to not serve alcohol after 7 p.m. and for restaurants to close early. However, this is not mandatory, and there are many places where you can stay all day and pretty late. Last week we had dinner at Gonpachi Sushi restaurant, which is not far from where we live. We invited some friends there to enjoy dinner, and Gonpachi is a really wonderful restaurant, and one of these places which you should visit if you happen to visit Tokyo. The sushi is very good, the price is quite reasonable, and the building is really interesting. There are 3 floors in the building, and private rooms are on the top. The other floors are for, I guess, ordinary visitors. For those of you who saw the movie Kill Bill, a couple of the scenes from the movie were actually filmed in this restaurant, which is quite difficult because officially you're not really allowed to make movies in Japan if you're not a Japanese production company. But anyway, the food was quite good. We enjoyed a lot of good dishes, and it was very wonderful. Moving on here later to Japan, on this week we had the Tanabata festival, which is the star festival in Japan, which is celebrated every year. And in the Tanabata festival, the people like to visit the local temple or shrine, write their wish on a piece of paper, and then hang their wish from a bamboo tree, which there are zillions of around Japan, but not very many of in Tokyo. We went to the Zozoji temple, which is the largest temple in our area, and the resting place for many of the shoguns from the Tokugawa family. The temple is quite large and beautiful, and is located right in front of Tokyo Tower. And every summer during Tanabata, they have this beautiful display of candles put in paper bags. When I was a kid in New Mexico, we called these luminarios. I'm not really sure what the word is in Japanese. I haven't really looked at it yet, but they arranged them up the steps leading up to the temple, and it's quite beautiful. We went to the tent and collected our papers and wrote our wishes and hung them on racks which were set outside. There were only a couple of bamboo trees here, and if all the people in the area were to hang their wishes on these trees, they would probably fall down from the weight. So it was quite nice. The last thing which is going on in Tokyo is the Olympics, which are supposed to start now in less than 2 weeks. It's kind of a laid back or downscaled, or whatever you want to call, Olympics, due to the fact that there will be no spectators, at least here in the Tokyo events. It's kind of a shame because 3.5 million tickets had been sold for these events. And these tickets were quite difficult to get. You had to enter a lottery system, and your odds of getting a ticket were only 1 in 8. And I can't say I'm disappointed because we weren't able to win any tickets. So we weren't going anyway, but to those 3.5 million people who did have tickets, it's kind of a shame. So, and also for the Olympic Committee itself and Tokyo Olympics, which was hoping to, I guess, pay for some of the cost of hosting the Olympics. The fact that they couldn't sell any tickets is a kind of a kick in the backside to them. But anyway, we'll go ahead and get started on the subject of today's video. And today we're going to be talking about a Nikon rangefinder camera. In this case, it's going to be the Nikon S3. For those of you who are new to my channel, I sell vintage Japanese cameras in my online store, japanvintagecamera.com, and at my Etsy store, which is also called Japan Vintage Camera. So if you're interested in buying this camera, and I happen to have it listed right now, please visit one of my stores. I'll post links to the stores in the description below the video. So the Nikon S3 is really an amazing camera and is one of my all-time favorite cameras. It was introduced in 1958 in kind of a much improved version of the S series, the previous camera being the S2, which was produced until 1958. In 1958, Nikon also introduced the SP, which was the same fundamental camera as the S3, but with an improved viewfinder and an accessory finder which was built in for a 28mm lens. Personally, for simplicity's sake, reliability, and all-around use, I prefer the S3 to the SP. Mainly, a lot of things which are described as the SP's advantages are things which I kind of refer to as unnecessary complications. If you look at the SP on the rewind dial, there's kind of a selector lever where you can select the different frame lines for the different lenses, whereas on the S3 all the frame lines are put together. The wonderful thing about the S3 is that you can use these frame lines from anything from the 35mm lens to the 135mm lens, and this is a one-to-one viewfinder, so it shows things in life size. It doesn't have a magnified viewfinder which kind of increases the field of view in order to make it easier to use wider angle lenses. That's quite handy if you want to shoot a, say, 28mm lens without an accessory finder, but you're kind of required to shoot with one eye, whereas a one-to-one viewfinder you can hold both eyes open and everything looks the same through both eyes. So a kind of wonderful feature. And the 28mm finder on the S3 is very squinty. Here you have a rather large single viewfinder eyepiece. On the SP you have two eyepieces, the standard one and the 28mm one. The S3 is a simplified and more efficient package than the SP. Not to say that I hate the SP. I had one of the 2005 limited edition ones for a long time. I really loved the camera, the quality, and I especially loved the lens which came on it. The one I had wasn't fitted with the 35mm f1.8 lens. Mine had the 50mm, what they call Millennium Nikkor, which was really amazing. But the lenses which came on the earlier cameras, like this 5cm f1.4, are, say, 98% the same as the Millennium Nikkor for about 20% of the cost. So, as I said, this camera was introduced in 1958 and was produced until 1961 or so. Sales weren't very strong for some reason. Well, people preferred the SP because the difference in the price wasn't that great. And then, as now, people were kind of willing to pay a small amount for a lot of things that they didn't necessarily need because marketing made these things sound more necessary than they actually were. So around 15,000 of these cameras were made, and so they're not all that common, not especially rare, but not especially common. In the 1964 Olympics, 2,000 more cameras were made with a special 50mm f1.4 lens, supposedly improved over the 5cm lens. To myself, the only difference between the 50mm lens and the 5cm lens was that the 50mm lens was longer and you required a bigger case to hold the camera and the lens. We'll go ahead and take a look at the features, functions, controls, and how to use the Nikon S3. And starting at the top here, we have the rewind lever, which if you look at the controls on the top here, the rewind lever, the shutter speed lever, the release lever and collar around it, and the winding lever and counter, these are pretty much all the same things which you find on the Nikon F SLR camera. And indeed, many of the parts on this camera interchange with the Nikon F. Many of these S3s came with cloth shutters, and The cloth is actually a very durable silk, very strong, and lasts pretty much forever, but in some cameras which weren't stored well, or shall I say were stored badly, the silk deteriorated, and it's quite easy for a competent camera repair person to replace the cloth shutters in these cameras with the titanium shutters which come in the Nikon F. So anyway, as I said, this is the rewind lever. It's knurled all the way around like the Nikon F, and also has the same pop-out lever with a convenient little handle on the end here. Like the early Nikon Fs, it has this Nippon Kogaku Tokyo emblem on here with what is supposed to be an image of Mount Fuji behind it, and then the serial number here below. We have a shoe here for mounting a couple of things. The most common thing mounted to it is, of course, a flash gun. You can use a modern flash on this camera by attaching a PC sync cord here to this socket next to the viewfinder window. Nikon also made a coupled light meter, which you slid onto the viewfinder here, and which engaged the shutter speed dial. And this allowed you to change the shutter speed, and the light meter would recommend the best aperture for that particular speed. We have a couple of dings on the front of the camera here from mounting one of these flashes or the light meter, and sometimes these things are kind of hard to get on, and people will kind of have to wiggle them to get them off, and that can cause the small marks which you see on the front of this one. However, this camera still is in quite beautiful condition. Next to that, we have the shutter speed dial. We have a full range of speeds from T and B all the way up to 1/1000th of a second. The T setting we don't have on the Nikon F camera. It started with just the B setting. With the T setting, what you do is if you wind the shutter and you push the shutter button, it will lock open, remain open until you either change the aperture dial. And the B setting is just a bulb setting, and you just hold down the shutter button for as long as you want the shutter to remain open. We have the shutter button here, and we have a indicator here which lines up showing that the film is wound, and we have a black point here on the collar around the shutter speed dial, and this is a switch. And this switch allows you to engage or disengage the winding mechanism, and that does two things. First, if you switch it to the R, it allows you to rewind the film, and you can also use this feature to take double exposures. Next to this, we have the film counter dial here, and below the film counter dial we have another switch, which is just a reminder indicator to what kind of film you have loaded in the camera, whether it's a 20 exposure roll or a 36 exposure roll. And here we have the film winder, and this winder here is kind of a stamped steel one. You can see it's kind of hollow, which takes a little bit of weight off of the camera. A lot of these cameras which I come by, for whatever reason, old shooters or whatever, who are like hungry to upgrade their camera in some way, they adapt a later model Nikon F winder, which fits perfectly and is a solid piece of metal rather than the stamped metal which is used on the S3. Moving to the back here, we have the viewfinder window, and as I said previously, we have bright line frame lines for the 35mm through 135mm lenses. The wonderful thing about these old Nikon rangefinder cameras is that Nikon made phenomenal lenses. They were incredible performers, and they made a wide variety of focal lengths. The widest lens you could get for this camera was the 21mm lens, which came with an accessory finder. I had one of these lenses, not knowing how ungodly rare and expensive they were, and I used it on old S3 for quite some time. And I really loved the performance of the lens. It was quite sharp, maybe not very contrasty, but really good and wonderful for shooting indoors or in tight places. Then there was a 2.5 centimeter lens, which was made around the same time, which was a little bit wider, a little more common than the 2.1 centimeter lens, and therefore a little bit less expensive, but still today they run about $1,200 or $1,300 here in Japan. And the standard lens on the camera was a 5mm or 5 centimeter f1, f2 lens, and then the faster lens was of course this sonar type 5 centimeter f1.4. 28mm lens is a wonderful lens. I had my first really good rangefinder camera was a very old and beat up Nikon SP, which was fitted with the 28mm lens. And as ugly and beat up as the camera was, the lens was quite nice. And I used this camera to film a lot of the scenes from around the Shinjuku area. One of my videos shows some of the photographs I've taken here in Japan, and a lot of the photographs in that video were taken with that 28mm or 2.8cm lens. There were a few different 35mm lenses available. The best one was the 35mm f1.8 lens, which was a really wonderful lens, probably one of the best lenses which Nikon has ever produced, and it was kind of the I guess source of, or I guess the foundation which the later, say, the new X series Fuji cameras, their 35mm f1.4 lens was based on the earlier Nikon 35mm f1.8 lenses. There were a variety of short telephoto and telephoto lenses, 85mm, 100mm, 135mm, and super telephoto lenses, believe it or not. Not many of those were sold for obvious reasons. It's really hard to use lenses like that with a rangefinder camera. Yeah, it's one of the, I guess, one of the most complete rangefinder system cameras you will find. You will find a more variety of lenses for the Nikon cameras than you will find for a Leica or other type of interchangeable lens rangefinder cameras. Moving to the front of the camera here, we have the viewfinder window, which is very large to allow a lot of light in and give you a very good view of your image. And over on the other side here, we have the rangefinder window. We have kind of a wide track here between the two windows, which allows for more precise focusing. Nikon also made, I forgot to mention it, 50mm f1.1 lens, which is a very large and heavy piece of glass. The earlier ones fit inside the focusing mount like this later model lens, but it was so heavy that the pressure on the focusing helicoid made it rather difficult to focus. So the later lenses were kind of like the wider angle lenses, which mount to the outside of the bayonet, which is kind of fitted here, and that allowed the bayonet to hold the weight of the lens and not the focusing helicoid. We have a release button here for which you use is kind of like the focus lock. When you focus the camera to infinity, it will lock. To unlock it, you simply push it with your finger and you can focus the camera. You can focus either turning the lens itself like so, or by using the focusing ring here. There's another lever here which also disengages. You'll probably see as I push my finger on this small lever, the big lever here moves. The wonderful thing which is unique about these cameras compared to other rangefinder cameras is the one-handed operation. You can adjust the aperture, you can wind the shutter, you can focus and everything with just one hand, which is quite amazing. Unfortunately, you can't set the aperture with just one hand, though I suppose if you really tried, if you were a one-handed person, had only your right hand, you could probably operate the camera completely. But this makes it kind of unique, especially from SLR cameras, where you generally need to hold the camera in one hand to focus it and then wind and operate the camera with the other hand. On the bottom here we have a self-timer, which is quite a reliable timer compared to the timers we find in other cameras of the era. Normally I recommend not using self-timers in vintage cameras because they are fragile and prone to sticking and failing, but Nikon engineered a very high quality self-timer for these cameras. We have a odd lens mount here, which is very similar to the Contax mount. There's a release tab set here, and there's the focusing scale set up on the outside here, and this particular one is arranged in feet. To attach the lens, you have to find the little red tab here, which is located on the edge of the lens, and you simply line it up with the mark and turn it leftwards until it locks in place. It holds the lens quite firmly. You don't have to worry about wiggling or rattling around. Lens changes are quite fast. Just push the tab and pull it around. For wider angle lenses which fit around the outside of the bayonet, around the focusing helicoid, the lens itself will have a tab, and you push down and turn the lens to remove it rather than having to push this lever on the camera itself. On the bottom here we have a standard 1/4 inch tripod socket. On this side here we have a reminder dial which allows you to set the film speed in the camera. This is merely a kind of a cosmetic thing. It doesn't matter what you have this set to. It doesn't affect the operation of the camera. On the side here we have the lever which allows you to remove the film back and load the film. Loading the film is quite simple on one of these cameras. You place after you move the film back, the best place to put the film door is under your shoulder here in your armpit. I guess the old military photographers used to call the old Nikon F the armpit camera because you had to put the film back in your armpit. You would put the film canister here in this opening on the left side, stretch the film across the shutter curtains, feed it into the take-up spool, and there's a very handy knurled lever here on the bottom of the take-up spool which allows you to wind the film. Just keep winding the film across until the holes on either side of the film engage the teeth on the take-up sprocket here, and fire the shutter until actually you should fire the shutter after you put on the film back. I put on the film back not down here really low, but here on just near the top, so I don't kind of catch the film and pinch it when I'm trying to put the film back on. And then you can simply wind the film until we get up to number 1 on the film counter dial. What is wonderful about this camera, and one of the things which I really like about it, is how light and smooth it is to operate. It's very much lighter and smoother than any SLR camera and most rangefinder cameras. It's very comparable to a Leica M series, and having had a lot of Leica M cameras, I've got a lot of experience with them. The shutter is very quiet on these cameras and very smooth. It's a wonderful camera for street photography because it doesn't make enough noise to draw attention to it, and it's just a real jewel. So anyway, as I said, this camera is listed for sale right now on my it's at my Etsy store listed right now. I'll list it later at my online store, so if you're interested, please visit one of my stores. The last thing I have to show you is this camera comes with the original lens hood, and these lens hoods cost about $100 here in Japan, and they're quite effective at keeping the light off the lens, but they are quite large, and one thing I don't like about them is they wipe out about 1/3 of the view, 1/4 or 1/3 of the view through the viewfinder. If you're going to use one of these cameras, I would recommend getting one of the accessory vented hoods which you can find on Amazon or eBay or places like that. But on this camera, I'll say with the 50mm lens, the glass comes quite close to the front, and if you aren't using I'm getting a little tongue twisted here, a hood on your camera, you're likely to get some flares and things like that. So this camera will include the original hood, but if you shoot one of these cameras with a 50mm lens, I would recommend using one of the vented hoods you'll find for sale online. For the lenses with the wide angle lens, especially the 28mm lens, the glass sits very far inside the lens body, so a hood isn't really necessary on those. So anyway, that's it for my video about the Nikon S3. I'll be posting more videos soon if the weather allows me, so if you'd like to see those, please stay tuned, subscribe if you would like to. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.